All right. Thank you, Maymay. So I'd like to introduce our speaker. We're going to dive right into our program. Chief Kathy Lester joined the Sacramento Police Department in 1994 as a dispatcher and became a community service officer in 1995 and then a sworn police officer in 1996. She has worked patrol, traffic, recruiting, internal affairs, criminal intelligence, and as an executive lieutenant and oversaw police services for the Sacramento City Unified School District. She has led the Contract Services Division, Personnel and Fiscal Division, the Downtown Patrol Command, and the Division of Outreach and Engagement. As a deputy chief, she has also overseen the Office of Specialized Services and the Office of Operations. Sounds like kind of a little bit of everything. Kathy enlisted in the Army at age 17. She attended the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, where she became fluent in Russian and served as a military interpreter, combat medic, and range master. She has received multiple awards and recognition, including the Army Life-Saving Medal and a unit citation for her contributions to support the opening of the Golden One Center. Kathy has been an instructor in crowd control, first aid, community relations, gender awareness, and implicit bias. She's a graduate of the Sherman Block Supervisor Leadership Institute, the Senior Management Institute for Police, the Post Management course, the Advanced Post Instructor course, and the Police Executive Leadership Institute. She is also adjunct faculty for the Los Rios Community College District. Kathy earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Sac State in Government and International Relations and a Master of Science degree from Mississippi State University in Geosciences. She has been a Cub Scout leader and served as a volunteer for SAC PAL, the Buddy Werner Youth Ski League, and serves on the board of the Sacramento Police Foundation. She is a busy, busy person. Kathy joined SPD because of its reputation for community-based policing. She is proud to serve with the great people of the Sacramento community. She is married with 3 children and loves to cook, garden, and fly fish. So I would love to introduce Kathy Lester. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Good morning. I don't have to talk. She said so much about me. Actually, it's because of my husband. He just retired in December, thank goodness. Otherwise, I wouldn't even have clean socks right now because it's gotten much busier in this position. So good morning. The last time I was out to see you, I was like a +1 for Dan Hahn, and it was a luncheon, and it's been a couple of years since we all got together, but I remember what a fun group this was. So thank you for having me out. I was asked to speak kind of on what we're doing at the, hi Lewis, I just saw you in the audience. Good morning. I was just asked to speak on what we're doing at the department. So, my bio and my history, I've been here for almost 3 decades, and Chief Hahn retired in December. I took the position December 31st, and we really didn't do this big public swearing in until March. And then about 2 weeks after our swearing in of not just me, but an entire new command staff, all new deputy chiefs, half of our captains retired and needed to be replaced, and about 1/3 of our lieutenants also are brand new in the position. We had the 10th and K Street shooting, and everyone said, oh my gosh, your first 2 weeks in office, how could this happen? But fortunately, it had been about 3 or 4 months that I'd actually been in the position. And we just had, yesterday was the 6-month landmark of that mass shooting, which was just horrific for our city. So I'd like to start off with talking about what is really important to me and what we're doing within the city. So last year, I was overseeing operations, which is all of patrol, the 911 center, and we were seeing, not unique to Sacramento, a big uptick in our shootings and our murders, quite frankly. We had not seen numbers that high since about 2006. The numbers before then were like the highest in 1993, the year before I started. And so last year we had 57, actually 58 homicides. We had 1 person pass that had been injured in a prior year. And that was significant. The thing that also is really significant is the amount of gun violence we're seeing. And I know that that's not a shock to anyone. If you've turned turned on your news locally or the national news, you see what a difficult situation this is for most major cities in the United States. And I can tell you, I have never ever in my career seen as many guns as what we see and what we're confiscating. And so, one, I'm very, very worried for our community. And I'm also very worried for the police officers that are out there every single day, 24 hours a day, making contact with people and taking guns off the streets. The other phenomenon that we're seeing is something called ghost guns. I'm sure you guys have heard of these things. And this is something I never imagined in my career. But essentially, you can buy parts online, and the laws are changing to make this much more difficult, fortunately. But you can literally buy a kit, watch a YouTube video, and with a couple of very, very basic tools, build your own gun. And so if you have a criminal history, whereas you couldn't walk into Bass Pro Shops or you couldn't walk into a retailer and buy a weapon, you can order these online or obtain them illegally on the market. So for comparison, in 2020, we confiscated over 1,200 guns. Last year, it was over 1,600, almost 1,700. And about a quarter of those were these illegal, unknown, untraceable ghost guns, which is really, really significant. And, quite frankly, we're pulling guns off of people at an alarming rate. So one of my priorities is to reduce violence in our city, in particular gun violence, because that's such a critical thing. And there's a couple of areas that we can actually work in. So the laws have changed. They're not very favorable, quite frankly, to law enforcement or accountability when it comes to that. However, if you are a prior offender, or if you're currently out on a case and you are arrested with a gun, we are working very, very closely with our district attorney to make sure that those cases are prosecuted and people are actually held in custody. But it's a much bigger issue than that. So, I've spent my whole life working in this job in law enforcement. And I can tell you that enforcement is one component of the criminal justice system and the solution, but it is not the only solution. What we see, and the reason people are driven really to violence, often has a lot of things that happen to them, prior to contact with the police or prior to that violent act when it actually happens. And so one thing that I really believe in, and one thing I did about 10 years ago in the school district when I was there, was to work very closely with some of our community partners to try and address these root causes that drive people to violence. At the time, it was driving, kids to violence in school, to having kids drop out of school, to become chronic truants. I have a little bit of personal history. I grew up in Rancho Cordova. I too was a chronic truant. I did not graduate high school, despite my great bio that she read there. And I joined the Army at 17. So I really get where, these kids are coming from. Fortunately for me, I had the opportunity to get in the Army, kind of straighten my life out, and actually join the police department after working a number of odd jobs. So I'm very, very fortunate, but I know that there's a lot of people in our community that do not have that same set of circumstances. So I actually went in front of our city council in June and made a pitch, and they have supported me greatly on this, to have a comprehensive plan that includes a very robust partnership with a number of our community-based organizations. As you know, Sacramento is not a huge city. It's really difficult to go anywhere and not see someone or have like some type of contact through someone else. I can tell you one of the really unfortunately tragic things that I deal with is when there's a homicide victim in our city, I typically have personal knowledge of the family or someone who knows the family. That's really how small Sacramento is and how long, we've been here and we've interacted. But that's also a great strength for us because we have a number of community partners that do amazing work in our neighborhoods. And I think for a long time, they've quite frankly been underutilized, and we have not had a coordinated response. So our department right now on the issue of particularly gun violence is doing a couple of things. One, we are identifying people that are considered prolific offenders, ones that have a history of violence or potentially could become involved in criminal activity in the very near future based on their prior activity. And we are proactively doing outreach to those individuals. So I'll give you kind of an example. We know that when you're talking about urban violence, most urban violence is concentrated in very small geographic neighborhoods, and it's committed by a small number of offenders. And these tend to be our prolific offenders. So we're proactively doing outreach. We're contacting them, and hopefully we don't get them with anything that's illegal. If we do, we obviously conduct enforcement. But more importantly, what we're trying to do is connect those individuals to services, to CBOs, to jobs, to to someone to actually follow up with these offenders to try and prevent them from engaging in future criminal activity. And I don't think that it's an insurmountable problem. When you look at the number of shootings that we had last year and the number of offenders, we're looking at about 600 offenders in a city and a region our size. And so working with our community-based partners, we're starting to really see some traction and some improvement there. We're also working with our community-based partners to do two other things. One, and a question was posed to me a number of years ago. I was at an area congregations together meeting, and one of the gals at that meeting asked me, she said, "Hey, I have a question for you. So when you go to, let's say, a domestic violence call and there is someone there who ends up getting arrested, but you've got a family who's clearly traumatized, kids that saw what happened, what happens the next day? What do you do?" And I just said, you know what, we don't. That's not the role of the police department. We're kind of like the emergency room, and we send you to your primary care physician, once you're treated. And that really rang true with me, and that we need to do more for communities who suffer from really traumatic incidents, especially within the home. And so we are having these community-based organizations not only work proactively with people that are offenders, but when we have something that's significant, whether it's a homicide or a significant shooting, they're actually responding out to the scene so that we have somebody that can do that follow-up and can help our community. And then the other piece of it, and I think this is kind of a product of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of challenges with kids, especially in our retail shopping areas, whether it's Arden Fair Mall, Old Sac, Delta Shores. And they're kids with no place to go, and they get in trouble, quite frankly, and so what we're trying to do is actually deploy our CBOs to those areas to do intervention and try and keep fights from breaking out, to try and keep kids from fighting each other, or from, creating problems. And if you look back at this summer, it's been very, very effective, where we have not seen any big issues like we had over the past couple of summers. And so right now, it's a little bit too early to tell. Like, I'm not going to take credit for the program yet, because I imagine we're going to have to do some adjustments, but we are seeing some early reductions that are promising. So if you go through August of last year and compare it with August year to date, or August of this year, we had about 173 people that were the victims of shootings within the city of Sacramento last year. The same time this year, we're about 119. So we're seeing about a 30% reduction. However, that's still 119 people too many, in my opinion. So there's still a lot of work to be done. So that's really a challenge for us. So that's one area that we're really working in. The other piece, that there's two other areas that I've prioritized this year. As you know, we don't have staffing. Like, I'm sure everyone here, we know how hard it is to get employees, right? And what a challenge it is to get people into the workforce. This is across the United States in every industry right now, and law enforcement is no exception. So that makes me really have to prioritize and pick and choose, what we're going to do and how we're going to deploy our resources so we can be most effective. And so right now, gun violence for me is really the number one priority for our department, and trying to, reduce those numbers. Not to say that property crime, quality of life crimes are not significant, because they certainly are, and they impact a number of people, but we have to really stop the bleeding in our city. And that's where we're putting a lot of our folks and our resources. I'm also very much an advocate of accountability and transparency. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to create a new division within the police department, and that never happens. You never get to build your own unit. So that was great. And essentially what I saw was we have a number of community partners that are doing great work. We have grants, we work with youth, but it wasn't really coordinated. So we put the Office of Outreach and Engagement together. And part of that was to be more transparent as a department. So we started building on what we had shared publicly and making that very much available to the public, to the extent that most agencies have not done this, and they are not really quite there. But if you look at what we produce and the stats that we put out, the information that we share publicly, mostly through our website, it's very robust. All of our policies are there, all of our significant incidents. If you want to, PRA something with the department, we make it easy for you, so you don't have to fish through the city website and figure it out. We put a lot of incidents that have, community concern on that website, and really try and push a lot of information out, not just through the website, but also through our social media. And it's an expectation I have of all of the commands that they share very openly and regularly with the constituents in their areas what we're doing. I also am a firm believer in accountability. It is not a surprise that there is a lack of trust between our communities and law enforcement. Certainly, you saw in the last few years with the murder of George Floyd and how everything came really to a head. But you have to understand that didn't just happen 2 years ago. This has been a long time coming for the social justice movement to take place. And if we don't do a better job in law enforcement of being very transparent, being very public, and being very open, and holding ourselves accountable to this very important role we have, we are never going to achieve that kind of success with the community. And so for me, being able to talk very openly, and the laws are fortunately starting to come around in the favor of police chiefs who want to share information, when we do hold our own accountable, that is definitely moving in the right direction. You'll hear me talk very openly about, what we're doing and what I expect. The last piece that is really important to me is customer service. And I know that sounds maybe kind of silly. A couple of years ago, I was over at the Concord Police Department, and they had brought the Disney Institute in to do training for their entire police department on what it means to give good service. Before this job, I had a lot of odd jobs. I was a custodian. I worked at Pizza Hut. I worked at Round Table. I worked for MCI Telecommunications. If you're under the age of 40, you have no idea what MCI Telecommunications was, right? And I almost didn't take the job here at the police department because that job paid $7 an hour and it had free long distance. And free long distance in the 90s was a big deal, right? And so I don't know that I want to give up my free long distance for a career in law enforcement, but dispatch paid $12 an hour and it had full benefits. So I made the jump and I have not looked back since. But I can tell you in that job, I was a waitress. I was a seating hostess at JJ North's Grand Buffet. It was right down the street. It was also over in Rancho. But service is a really important aspect of what we should all be doing in every industry. And I think law enforcement's about 20 years behind, quite frankly. We don't measure it. We don't really train it the way we need to. And when we're talking about trying to build trust in communities, I can have all these great programs for the department. I can do tons of things with youth. I can, build robust programs and message that, we're trying to build trust in the community. But I'll tell you what, if the officer that responds to your call doesn't treat you with respect, doesn't leave you feeling like they actually cared and they were trying to help you, it gets us nowhere. And so that's the piece I think that we have missed in law enforcement. We have I'm very excited to say that even though we have challenges with hiring, I have a very great group of young men and women that are joining the police department. And they really, really want to do a good job. And they have their hearts are just absolutely in the profession. And I always talk to them. When I was deputy chief, one of the great things I got to do was interview every candidate that came into the department and make sure that we had a good fit. Just because you meet the qualifications doesn't mean that you're going to be a good fit for our department. And I talked about this and I said, we can't get nearly to all of the calls that we would want to get to. But when we get there, we need to make sure that we are doing our absolute best for the people that are involved. And I talk about service and you see their heads nod, but I know that we do a great job of teaching people how to drive, how to use all of their tools. They know the law, but when it comes to actually doing that interaction and making sure that we ask them basic questions, how can I help you today? I'm here to help. At the very end, you need to ask, did I do everything I could to satisfy you? And we're looking at other agencies. There are only really two agencies that I know that are doing it really well. One is Charlotte. Chief Johnny Jennings out there has done a great job with his department. And Ken Corey, who's a friend of mine with NYPD, has brought in service to be a real component of what they do and are also measuring it. And so a couple of things. One, we are training every new recruit that we bring on the street. The last class they get is from me and from my executive team talking about the importance of this. And we show real life examples of where we did really well and where we missed the mark. We also are going to be rolling that out to all of our training officers and to the entire department. And then we've spent some money on technology called Spider Tech, which is really a customer service platform to tell us how we're doing. And this is not uncommon in the private sector, right? You need to be able to measure how you're doing and how your services are being perceived. And so we are working on trying to get into the 21st century along the lines of Amazon and some of these other companies that are very good about acknowledging when you've maybe submitted a report, letting you know and informing you of where that report is or what the status of your investigation is, providing you information. And so we've just piloted it with about 10 different types of reports, and we're going to be expanding that to most of our calls for service. So an officer comes to your residence, to your business, you'll be able to get a text message to provide feedback on how we're doing. And then I hope to make some adjustments on that, because I really believe that is the only way that we're going to be able to make progress as a profession and really do what we are designed to do, which is to serve our community. One of the questions that I was asked was specific to to realtors, what to look out for, what safety issues we see. And I think it'll probably come up when we do a Q&A. But there's a couple of things specific that I wanted to talk about. What we're seeing most related to what you guys do is when you have a vacant home, we're finding that people break in and take it as their own. Everyone's nodding their head, and that's a real challenge. And we've had issues not just here locally, but you've seen issues in like Oakland, for example, where homes have literally been taken over by folks. And I think our biggest challenge there is that is private property, and the realtor or the private property owner has the ability to control that property. Sometimes we have a hard time finding who actually owns that property, and it gives us very little ability to actually move people off of private residence. So that has been a challenge for us. We also had kind of an odd thing. One of my swing shift watch commanders had brought this up. There was an online platform, and essentially what you could do is you could register to look at a house without a realtor present, and it gave you time slots throughout the day. And when you were given that time slot, it would give you a code to get into the house. So it's unsupervised. There's no one there, which just seems kind of strange to me. What we were finding is that we would have people ask for the end of the day time slot, 6 or 6:15, enter the code, and then just decide that they were going to stay there for the evening. And so I think we've worked with that company to sort of address some of those challenges. That wasn't something that was really expected. And it was one of those new things like, that's an interesting problem. How do we deal with that? So the other challenge I would say is when we put for sale signs, for rent signs out in front, sometimes that can be a beacon that the house is vacant and it's time to come in. And so we don't want to attract crime for sure. But I would like to say for everyone here, since you're in the field and since you are often at residences and sites, that you please just have some awareness when you're approaching homes, especially if you haven't been there recently, to really take a look around, make sure that nothing looks out of place. And if something does, to please call us before you enter the home. If you have a buddy, take a buddy with you. And then one of the best things that we have is often neighbors will know when a house obviously is vacant, when somebody has moved out. So to really try and form a relationship with whoever the neighbors are, because they really are your eyes and ears. And we will often get calls from neighbors when they say, hey, something's not right with that house. No one's supposed to be in there right now. Lights are on. We saw a car coming and going, because we still do see the scams where we have the fake rental agreements, the fake leases. And those can be a real challenge for us and get into the civil issues. But the sooner that we can get on those problems, and if someone's not supposed to be in a residence or a business, that we can take action, the easier it is for us. If it goes on for weeks or months, now we get into issues of established residency, and it becomes much, much more complicated for a local, police officer to try and resolve. So with that, maybe I can turn it over if you have some questions.
Are there any questions? I'll run around like Phil Donahue.
I love it. Get your steps in early this morning.
Perfect. Good morning. This is more of just a comment. I'm the love-hate person that goes on Nextdoor, and one of the things the plus of it is that I actually can see if a crime's taking place. The best part is I see where the police department comes in and tells us what happens with stuff.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage that. That's really been a help.
Thank you. I'm really glad. And thank you for being on Nextdoor. If you are on Nextdoor, we can push information out, but we don't actually get to see what neighbors are talking about. So we put out safety messages an awful lot. And one of the things that we are piloting with the new software that we've just purchased and contracted with is that if you do make a call for service, let's say it's on a DUI driver, part of that software, the idea is that we'll be able to send you the disposition of a call. So you'll know what actually happened, because, we call, I've done it, right? You call the police department or the sheriff's department, make your call, and you have no idea how the call actually ended. And you really want to know. So I get it. And I appreciate that you're a Nextdoor user. We actually get great information from Nextdoor. And lots of times it's like the canary in the mine. Stuff will start brewing on Nextdoor, and we'll get a heads up that there's something going on in a neighborhood. So thank you. I really encourage you to continue to use that. That's not a love-hate relationship. Thank you. That's being a concerned and active citizen.
All right. Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm just wondering, all of the homeless encampments downtown, I've heard different things over the years. What are you allowed to do or not allowed to do in terms of those tense?
Yeah,
Can't
it's
leave.
tough. So a couple of things. So you guys have heard of, I'm sure, the Martin v. Boise, the Boise decision, the infamous Boise decision, which essentially says that you can't prosecute or cite anyone or move anyone for illegal camping unless you have available shelter space. And there's criteria around that shelter space. What really complicated that was the pandemic, because during the pandemic with the public health order, we really were not allowed to move anyone for fear of spreading COVID. And so what we saw were these encampments that were like small cities that built up. And unfortunately, it's not just the impact to the neighborhood. We're seeing a lot of victimization within those camps, sexual assault, drug use, just assaults in general. And it's something I'm really, really concerned around. The behaviors around homelessness are contributing to our crime numbers. I'll just be very honest about that. So people are very frustrated. Everyone's frustrated because this is not a condition that anyone should live in. And we not only need to have more available shelter space, but I will speak openly and often about the need for mental health services and the need for compelled drug treatment, because I think those are really compounding the issue. So one of the other things that we're seeing are a high number of people that are on parole that are in our homeless camps. And if you look back and see, like over the last 2 years, the challenge with COVID within our institutional or correctional systems is that they were pushing a lot of people out of the prison system back into their local residence. So before COVID, there would be at least a couple of months where there was preparation time to help people transition, get IDs, get Social Security, figure out where they were going to land. And with COVID, there was sort of this mass exodus of people out of our prison system. And we're seeing that impact in our homeless camps. You've also seen the Parkway ordinance that the county just passed to move people off of the Parkway. And I know they're being very strategic based on the number of fires, but I am concerned for the city itself that if we don't manage that better, that we are really going to see impact. So one of the things that, two things actually that I'm really pushing for right now, our city manager and our city council are working with the county board of supervisors. And I can say, honestly, I really have some hope for the first time in a while to come up with a partnership agreement, because most of the funding for drug treatment and for mental health and rehabilitation comes through the county. And the county is responsible for providing those services within the entire county, including incorporated areas like the city of Sacramento, city of Rancho, city of Citrus Heights. And so what we need are more actual mental health services. I need places for officers to be able to drop people off other than an emergency room, because the emergency rooms are not psychiatric facilities, and have some type of prolonged treatment. So there are some shining examples, right? We've got some new leadership at the county, and I'm very excited to work with. They've been very collaborative. They all recognize this is a problem, not just for the city of Sacramento, but certainly for the county. And we cannot allow people to continue to live in these conditions. So there's a push for more shelter space, but there's also a big push for mental health resources and drug treatment. I can tell you for our city, and I'm selfish, I look to see what I can do to help the city. There are 2 sites right downtown that we've just really recently partnered with. One is the Well Space Health Center right on the corner. It's right behind the jail. It's right there on like 7th and H. And they have the capacity to take people that are under the influence, because that's one of my biggest challenges. People that are under the influence, they haven't committed a crime yet, but they're going to be a victim, or they're going to victimize someone else. And there's very little that we can do with them. The jail is restricted on space. And so these are low-level misdemeanors. And we're put in this like position. It's like, what do we do with this person? This Well Space Center is going to be a great resource for us. It's open 24/7 a day, and I expect to utilize it a lot more to voluntarily take people off the street and actually get them into treatment. And they're showing some great success. The city supports that and funds it, as does the county. We need more of those, quite frankly, in the city. And then I actually just met with the public defender's office yesterday, and maybe that's odd that your police chief talks to the public defender, but it's really not, because we're all in the same situation where we see this revolving door of low-level criminal activity, and we have to stop that. Because if I talk to most people in the city of Sacramento, yes, violence is an issue, but it's really like the problems in their neighborhood, the traffic, the trash, somebody going through their trash, a homeless person that's camped out on their lawn. Those are the things that really are frustrating to the residents. And those are the things that I have probably the least amount of tools to do anything about. So working with the public defender's office, they're actually working through 5 grants, and they have essentially a diversion center in the old sheriff's headquarters at 711 G Street. And most people don't know that it's even there. So we just went through yesterday and are talking about connecting our mental health team and our downtown bike officers to voluntarily transport people there and get them into services. And you know, when people voluntarily accept services, you see that they're much more successful versus us just taking you to jail and sending you right out the front door in 4 or 5 hours. That does nothing to help improve someone's quality of life, and certainly does nothing to, to really have a positive impact on our community. So we're trying to do things like that. Those are 2 small things. I need more of those, but you'll hear me talk very openly and publicly about the need for mental health services.
All right.
Growing up in San Diego, later on, there was a program, and it was for domestic violence. And the police officers had stuffed animals in their trunk. And so when they went for a call and it was domestic violence, they saw children, they gave them a teddy bear. And for a long, long time, I've been pitching that, but nobody's ever done anything. I mean, you guys don't even have to pay for it. All these people here would donate a stuffed animal. You know, that would be great, because then the kids hang on to it. And it also helped, from what I learned, that it made the kids look at the police as friendly.
Yep.
So that would be great if you guys can do something like that.
I really appreciate that. And actually we do. We have stuffed animals, and that's part of one of the things that we do with our outreach and engagement unit, but all patrol officers actually have that. But I actually see that as a bigger challenge. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of domestic violence. We're finding a very unique connection between gun violence and domestic violence. If you have a previous history of domestic violence, the research shows that as you continue to offend, your harm to your victim increases significantly. And if a gun is involved, there's a much more significant chance that someone is going to die as an encounter of domestic violence. So we partner with the Sacramento Family Justice Center, which is over off of Power Inn, and they work collaboratively with Family Court. That is a great organization, and they have done so much work, not just in domestic violence, but in human trafficking as well for our region, that we not only partner with them, but they have helped us train our dispatchers to look for certain things. For example, if you are the victim of strangulation, or if you've ever been strangled by your intimate partner, the chances of that person assaulting you or a police officer responding go up significantly. And I can tell you, like, we're not very far from Wide Away, and you all remember what happened at the beginning of the year. Now, that was not within the city jurisdiction, but our officers were some of the first on scene because we butt up right to them. And in that case, there was a significant history of strangulation. The other piece of it is that we find we're seeing an increase in our homeless population. If you look at the clientele at the Family Justice Center, they've seen a huge increase of, nearly 700 people in the last 2 years, mostly women and children that have been driven out of their homes by either domestic abuse or sexual abuse. And so there's a real need for that in our community. We actually are partnering with a Weave advocate. I was able to scrape up a little bit of money. Most of my budget, goes to pay employees and the cost of labor, but there's a little bit left over for things that we want to do. And so we're paying for a Weave advocate to do follow-up, but I would love to expand that program and actually put social workers in all of our stations that could actually work with our community-based organizations and follow up. Because if you're looking at violence in general, usually that starts in the home. And if you talk to our providers, like Gina Warren at the Neighborhood Wellness Foundation is a great person to talk to. If you go back historically, from people's criminal past, you see that often there is some significant trauma and there's violence in the home. And if we don't address that at a very young age, 20 years from now, we're going to continue to be talking about, increased violence within our country. So thank you for bringing that up.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. You mentioned low-level crimes earlier, and I know, you have limited resources and violence, and
Yep.
those problems have to come first. But have you had any conversations or any thoughts about porch pirates? Because I know in my neighborhood, every day there's at least one person
Yep.
on there.
Yep.
And I'm sure, my neighborhood is not unique.
It is not, actually. And Lewis will laugh at me because he remembers when I did this downtown. So I was the downtown captain for a while, and it was killing us, especially right around Christmas season. Everyone was getting their stuff taken off their porch. So we do something called, we have bait, and it's GPS bait, and we stick it to bikes, to generators, to purses inside, cars, and we try and catch people that way. So I had this great plan that we were going to start catching some of these folks. And we dressed up an Amazon package and we put a piece of bait in it and we had detectives sitting on it. Within a couple of minutes, that thing moved. I mean, literally, it had only been on the porch for a few minutes before it took off. And then it's going all over town and I've got detectives all over downtown trying to find this thing. We finally found it in a dumpster, empty. It was an epic failure. But the fact that it moved in 3 minutes tells you that there's really a problem here. It wasn't just me like following, complaints from next door. So we've gotten much better at that actually. And we do that on a regular basis. I would encourage people to either use like the Amazon, like if you have Amazon, like an Amazon Dropbox type service, because that is a real challenge. But what's been really helpful are the Ring cameras, right? Or the like technology has gotten so much better. And that's actually when we talk about having a better customer service platform, we have an online reporting system right now that's not great, I'll be honest. And one of the challenges has been that you can't upload videos and photos and whatnot. But what I would say is that, we are not such a big city. If that happens, that you don't reach out to your neighborhood association, to your area captain, you can reach out to me. And I mean, that sounds silly, but these are a big deal. And usually when one person is a victim of a crime like that, there's 20 other victims out there that need help, because a lot of people don't report it, think, oh, it's not that big of a deal, no one's going to do anything about it. Seriously, like we actually follow up. I remember downtown, we had a gal who had just landscaped her entire front yard. And somebody came along in the middle of the night and scooped up all of her rose bushes, her lawn furniture, everything. So she comes outside the next morning and her whole front yard is gone. Like I've never even seen that before. And so don't think that we didn't put people on it. And we actually found a bunch of her stuff and actually were able to get it back. But she actually had video from that. And that was the indication that we really need to improve some of our systems, because she wanted to submit the video. She showed the truck that had come and picked it up. We knew exactly what we were looking for, and there was no way for her to upload that information. And so we're trying to do a better job of that. Right now, what I would say is that please reach out to your area command. That's the nice thing about Sacramento. We're not so big that you don't know all of us, and you should have that personal relationship, be able to call your area captain or call the police department, drop that off. And we do follow up on things like that, especially, when we have good evidence to go after, because it happens, we see the same people doing it. And generally when we take someone to custody, we find that they're suspects in multiple cases. So I would encourage, even if it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, please call in and please report that stuff when it happens. We do see trends and we do try and be as responsive as possible, especially when we see like multiple instances in the same area.
Thank you. This is going to be the last question.
Good morning.
Morning.
Last week or so, the governor signed something that says that prior offenses are either going to be erased or never made public. How's that going to affect you? You mentioned earlier about, go back and see what someone's done when you, am I making any sense?
Yeah, and I'm not really, I heard that too. I'm following up on all the legislation because he signed everything last week and I haven't caught up on all of it. So now that everything's coming forward, we'll go through and see how that's going to affect us directly. I know that for employment, that is a challenge. Mostly the group that we are focusing on are people that are really actively involved in criminal activity, and so I don't know that that's going to impact what we do as much as it is helpful for people that are trying to seek employment outside of the criminal justice system. I can tell you that for us, we're very selective on who we focus efforts on, who we can work on helping. But I can tell you that when we look at people's ability to exit from the criminal side of life, there's two things that are really helpful. One, having a job, and two, having some type of mentor or some type of role model that can guide you through life. And so those are things that we are working on with our community partners, especially for folks that have had a history of violence and are likely become either a suspect or, quite frankly, a victim of ongoing violence. And so those are two things that we look at. But I do need to take a look. We're waiting for all this legislation to come through. There was a number of bills that were signed all the way through Friday night. So more to follow on that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.